And welcome to our introduction to government PowerPoint, just kind of the principles of government, some really basic outline information that's necessary uh, as we move along to understand how these different countries operate through their governments. So usually we have skeleton notes, but for this presentation, I'll need you guys to take their notes on a piece of notebook paper. Um, at any point, feel free to pause the video if you need to take a little longer to write. It can get a little wordy, but it'll mainly be fine for you guys to be able to pause it, go back, and so on and so forth. So, without further ado, we're going to get started. And so, what is government? This is a definition you're going to need. Government is an institution. Sometimes we elect it, sometimes it's elected for us, sometimes it's people that just claim themselves as a leader, but it's an institution that essentially guides society through enforcing public policies. Public policies are things like laws, different circumstances. So, for instance, speed limits. That's a public policy. Maybe you follow the speed limits, maybe you don't. I tend to have kind of a lead foot, but the government's in charge of determining what the speed limit is, what makes it safe for us. So, government has some basic responsibilities. One of them tends to be safety. One of them tends to be to provide the basic and necessary needs. So, again, it's all through public policy, which is laws. Or public policies. Um, all of the many goals that a government pursues in all the areas of human affairs in which it's involved. So essentially, we have policies for damn near everything, is what this is saying. There's policies for how much we can tax you, depending on how much you earn. Do we tax the rich more? Do we tax the poor less? So on and so forth. Defense, we're talking about protecting the country. So it's military, it's the National Guard, it's policing, it's EMTs. What do we provide for you guys to feel safe here in this country? Education, school is free. I know there's fees and stuff you have to pay, like lunch money, but for the main population, school is free. How we determine crime sentences and things like that, that's all public policy. It tends to sway back and forth depending on who tends to be in charge, but it's all public policy. Healthcare, kind of a controversial topic in this country. I'm actually recording this on election day. It's probably one of the most talked about things when it comes to elections, is because the government decides policy on healthcare. The really unpopular Affordable Care Act, or Obamacare, provided necessary healthcare for other people. The other side of that coin wants the healthcare markets to determine the price. So we have two different competing views on healthcare, and depending on how this election goes here today, it could change, it could stay the same. Transportation is also involved in this, along with the environment. So protecting the environment, or reeling back protections in the environment, are all involved. Again, it's all made through public policy decisions. This is, we're talking like the legislative branch making laws, the executive branch facilitating, enforcing laws, and the judicial branch reviewing the law. Civil rights, working conditions, and much more. Again, public policy, it's probably not the most exciting thing you're ever going to learn about, but know that it's involved in pretty much everything we're doing here in this country. Laws are determined, laws are debated, laws are signed. It all has to do with trying to make your life the best we can. So I do want you to take this table down right here. So it says the state. The state can have four different characteristics. And it's an important thing to know, like when we're talking about with states, we're talking about actual states. We can talk about something bigger than a state. In general, just states are places where people live and they're governed. I think it's about as simple as I can make it. So there's a population, territory, which is, there must be boundaries on this territory, there must be limits. Where does it end? Where does it start? Sovereignty. So every state is sovereign. It has absolute supreme power within its own territory, decides its own foreign and domestic policies. So we have state sovereignty in the United States. Again, this isn't just talking about the state of Wisconsin. This is talking about just political states. We have sovereign states, meaning that Wisconsin has different public policy than Minnesota does. Michigan has different public policy than Florida does. They decide what works best for their state when it comes to domestic policies. We're talking actual states here, like Wisconsin, Illinois, Minnesota. We're talking domestic policies. So, for instance, we live really close to it, but the Mall of America, I'm sure you guys like to go there every now and then. I don't really know if you want to go there right now. but they don't have sales tax. That's a public policy decided by the state of Minnesota. So whenever I go buy shoes, I tend to go over there because I don't have to pay a tax. And then each state also has a government. A government is something that's politically organized. It can be voted on. It can be determined for you already, but each state has a government. So we have something that runs it, which is right here. Let me get this little fun pointer. We have a government system in each state. Each state has its own rights and powers, and it determines it. It has a territory, rivers, mountains, borders, and it has people that live there. These are the four characteristics of just a political state. So the purpose of the government, and this is from the preamble of the United States, kind of more of a look at the U.S. government. We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States. So you don't have to write this down at all. Actually, let me make sure that works. So you don't have to write down the whole preamble. But what I would like you to do is think about what this is establishing for us here in the United States. By this opening statement, what is the function of our government? I'd like you to write a 2 to 3 sentence summary of what is this trying to establish for the people that live here. What are we trying to provide for the people? What kind of environment are we trying to make? Okay? And maybe think about, are we doing that right now? Are we providing these things? How far or how similar are we to our founding fathers? Government changes, the world changes. So that's something to think about when you're moving forward and you turn 18, you get the chance to vote, you get the chance to be a part of your government. It's thinking about, what's government for? What's it there to provide? Classifying governments. There are 3 different standards by which we classify. Okay? So one is who can participate in the governing process. Here we have popular votes, especially for the presidential election. In general, we use voting a lot in the United States. We have a Republican system, Democratic system. You've probably heard both. Not entirely sure what exactly we're called. It's a Democratic Republic. Either way, we have voting. The geographic distribution of governmental power within the state. So governments and how much power they have over an area. So the Wisconsin State Senate has power from the Mississippi River to Lake Michigan, not counting the UP, because that's our territory, that's our area. And then the relationship between the people that make the laws and the people that execute the laws of the government. Okay, so this is our legislative branch makes the laws and the president enforces the laws. Having that relationship is key to being able to classify a government. The checks and balances of the system are important. You don't have the people that are making the laws enforce the laws, right? You have the people that make them and separate people enforce them. It's kind of a balance of power. Classification by who can participate. You'll need to take down this in your notes. So according to history, democracy, the authority rests with the people. Popular votes. Direct democracy is where each vote counts for one, and the popular vote determines who wins the election. We here see something like an indirect democracy. So again, I'm talking on election day. There's a popular vote, but then that popular vote determines the choice of the electors. Really briefly, the Electoral College, each state has a different number of votes that it gets. So Wisconsin gets 10. And the popular vote, so if for say, let's say we have President Jim and we have a man running against him named Tim. Also, just to avoid using the names now and show any bias, we have Jim and Tim. Let's say Tim wins Wisconsin by 2 votes. Well, then all 10 electoral votes go to Tim, meaning that he gets all 10 electoral votes in the state of Wisconsin, and you need 270 votes to win the entire election. So on election day, if you're watching this, if you were watching at home, and you notice that you see a bunch of charts and graphs and graphics that show the race to 270, that's the Electoral College. That's an example of indirect democracy. Dictatorship Some countries we're going to be learning about, some areas they operate like a dictatorship with an authoritarian leader, someone that makes all the decisions and enforces the laws. In the United States, we pride people voting to make the laws. Dictatorships, it's one person or a small group of people, and they kind of do what they see as best without the say of the people. So dictatorship exists where those who rule cannot be held responsible by people, meaning there's no voting, meaning they can get away with some bad things if they want to. So an autocracy is a government where one person holds power. One person. Think of North Korea. One person holding unlimited political power. And then an oligarchy is a government in which the power to rule is held by a small, like self-appointed group of people. Oligarchies, I know from Western Civ, tended to be like the wealthy landowners. So you had people that made all the money in society making decisions for the rest of us. Democracy wants the voice of the people to be heard. Dictatorships and autocracies and oligarchies seem to fit certain interests better than just the voice of the people. So we got a little bit more here. A unitary government has all the powers held by one agency, meaning one central organization holds all of the powers. Confederate government, if you took APUSH, you learn about the Articles of Confederation. Each state had its own set of independent powers, meaning that each state back then had its own currency. It can become kind of confusing, but this is really, really similar to what it looks like in Europe. Each country there has its own independent set of rules. They all kind of relate to one another, but they all have some differences with one another as well. The unitary government is again like a lot like a North Korea, where all the power is held in one single building. And we have what's called a federal government, in which the powers are divided between a central power, meaning our federal government, like like Congress, Senate, President, things like that. But we also have state governments. There's a Wisconsin State Assembly. There's a Wisconsin State Senate. And there's also local governments. You have your mayors. You have your like county representatives. Okay, so we have voting and levels of authority on each individual level with local, state, and federal. These other two sometimes do, sometimes don't. Well, unitary never does. Confederates, I'm not sure. They might have some local decisions being made, but in general, federal government tends to value democracy, tends to value the vote and the voice of the people. It's a matter of if we give a damn or not, we use our vote. So an authority superior to both the central and local governments makes the division of power on a geographic basis. Essentially, we have someone that determines the power based on geography. So we have a president. He's the president of the United States of America, all 50 states. That's his division of power. We also have like a Wisconsin state governor, Tony Evers. He has control, power. Those are heavy words, but he has essentially authority over the state of Wisconsin. Okay, so last, I believe it's the last thing we're going to talk about here. Second to last, excuse me. So presidential and parliamentary governments. So we're here on the left, presidential relationship. Voters elect the legislature and chief executive, who is a part of the executive branch. So we vote on these people. We vote to put people in the legislative branch. We vote to put people in the executive branch. And then we also vote on who runs the executive branch. Okay? Parliament, the voters vote for the legislative branch, and then the people that make the laws determine who's going to execute the laws. So that's your main difference, is we vote on pretty much everything here, except for like the cabinet that's appointed by the chief executive, but we're picking this chief executive. And then over here, the voters pick the lawmakers, and they pick who's going to enforce the laws. Right, so make sure you take these down right here, these definitions. So forms of government. This is a little bit older. I think it's 2001, but I think most of this tends to be the same. You'll be able to see where the power is. Is it unitary? Is it federal? We're federal. We have presidential. We have a democracy. So you'll be able to see the different facets of these countries and where they fit in. You'll notice some of the trends here, like a lot of democracy in the world now. There's not a whole lot of dictatorship. There still is. We'll still learn about a few, but we have a lot of democracy and a lot of people participating. We've had movements as new as 2011 on through of like countries in the Middle East fighting for democracy. So we'll talk more about that. This was just supposed to be kind of a general run through of what government looks like, just really basic information. If you have questions, be sure to reach out and let me know. But otherwise, have a great day.